Start to the season is always key, and the Boston Bruins are going to have a much tougher October schedule this season than they did last year.
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoked B. Today is Tuesday, July 23rd, and I want to thank you so much for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine. Free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Today on the podcast, we're going to begin a series where we compare month to month between last season and this upcoming season and what challenges the Bruins may face, some special dates to highlight on the calendar. And we're focusing today specifically on the importance of a good start and how that will be much more difficult this season than it was last. Before we get into that, a quick reminder, you can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins, and you can find me, my hockey thoughts, and dad jokes at Ian C. McLaren. Now, to begin 2023-24, there were some real questions about how the Boston Bruins were going to fare without Patrice Bergeron, without David Krejci, and after having made some significant roster changes, trading Taylor Hall, Nick Foligno, subtracting Tyler Bertuzzi, Dmitry Orlov, Garnet Hathaway, and adding some veterans on the cheap like James Van Riemsdyk, Kevin Shattenkirk, Milan Lucic was in that group as well. What was key for the Bruins, of course, was the goaltending tandem of Linus Ullmark and Jeremy Swayman, and as we all know, that will not be the case this coming season. Thankfully, the Bruins were gifted a fairly soft and cakey schedule to begin the 2023-24 season. In fact, there were very few eventual playoff teams on the radar for them as the season began. They opened the regular season with a game against the Chicago Blackhawks. Yes, it featured Connor Bedard, but the Blackhawks went on to be one of the worst teams in the NHL last season. They had actually two games against the Blackhawks, one game against the San Jose Sharks, who of course finished dead last and ended up getting Macklin Celebrini first overall. They also had two games against the Anaheim Ducks, who finished near the bottom of the NHL standings last season, and games against the Detroit Red Wings, who also failed to make the playoffs, and then three eventual playoff teams in the Nashville Predators, the Los Angeles Kings, and the eventual Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers. The Bruins began the season with 6 straight wins. 3-1 win over Chicago, a 3-2 win over Nashville, 3-1 win over San Jose, a 4-2 win over the Kings, 3-1 win over the Ducks, a 3-0 shutout of the Blackhawks, before losing their first game of the season on October 26th to the Anaheim Ducks. And that was a 4-3 overtime loss, a game in which they ended up picking up a point. They did not lose their first game in regulation until October 28th, which was a 4-1. Actually, no, sorry. That was a 4-1 win over the Red Wings. They didn't lose until Saturday, November 4th, which was a 5-4 regulation loss against those Red Wings. They finished October with a 3-2 overtime win over the Florida Panthers on October 30th. So that stretch included 5, 6, 7 regulation wins, a overtime win, and an overtime loss. So they went 7-1-1 to begin the season last year. Again, some very winnable games on that schedule, some games against teams that went on to be some of the worst in the NHL last season. The San Jose Sharks finished with 47 points. The Ducks had 59 points. The Blackhawks had 52 points. So very fortunate that half their games in the month of October were against some of the worst teams in the NHL. To their credit, they did beat Nashville and the Kings, who both went on to make the playoffs. Detroit was a borderline team. And then, of course, the eventual Stanley Cup champions in the Florida Panthers that the Bruins also beat. But with all the changes, a big transition for the Boston Bruins, they were kind of gifted a very nice schedule by the NHL. And they made the most of it. Again, you only get the points if you beat the teams. There's really no gimme in the NHL, despite the fact that some of these teams were pretty bad. Any team can win on any given night in theory. And this stretch included a 4-game Western Conference road trip that took them to California and Chicago. Those were games 3 through 6 of the regular season. That easily could have derailed them pretty early on. But as is often the case, it brought them together. That kind of road trip early on in the season can often bring some real good bonding and galvanize a squad and really bring them together. And in fact, they won all 4 of those games in regulation, allowing only 4 goals in those 3 games. And again, goaltending was so key for the Boston Bruins last season. The 1A, 1B tandem of Ullmark and Swayman gave them a chance to win on any given night. And it really helped them not just stay afloat early on last season amid all these transitions, but helped them excel and put them atop the Atlantic Division, where they remained for the majority of the regular season. Now, will that be the case in 2024-25? Well, it's going to be a much tougher go for the Bruins here this upcoming season early on, and we'll discuss why here as the podcast continues. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. They have over 122 million parts for your ride, and you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. With the eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. All the parts you need at the prices you want. Make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. And the eBay Guaranteed Fit is available only to U.S. customers. Thank you so much once again for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine, free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And while you're on YouTube, be sure to check out the Locked On 24/7 channel, Locked On Sports Today. All the latest news, analysis, and opinions from across the Locked On universe. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network as well. Also available on the Amazon Fire TV channels app. So as we discussed, the Bruins had a pretty easy schedule to begin 2023-24, and they used that to their advantage while they were wading through some pretty significant transitions in losing Patrice Bergeron, David Krejci, and incorporating some youth into the lineup, Matt Poitras, some new players, etc. Now, when it comes to this upcoming season, there's going to be some transition as well. You're welcoming new faces in Nikita Zadorov, Elias Lindholm, Joonas Korpisalo, and that's going to be key as well. They will not have that superb tandem to rely on anymore. In fact, at the moment, Jeremy Swayman remains unsigned. We're quite sure that will get resolved prior to the start of the regular season at the very least. But with a jam-packed schedule in October, chances are Joonas Korpisalo, maybe Brandon Bussi, but likely not, will be pressed into action, and the Bruins can ill afford to drop a ton of points early on. There's that famous stat that suggests if you're outside of the playoff picture by American Thanksgiving, you are going to be hard pressed to get back into the playoff race, because with the 3-point games, the loser point, it's increasingly difficult to make up a bunch of ground when it comes to being outside looking in. Now, of course, the Edmonton Oilers last season were near the bottom of the standings in November, and then climbed their way back in and made it all the way to the Stanley Cup final. We know the St. Louis Blues did something similar in 2019, but getting off to a good start is key because of the loser point and the fact that it is difficult to climb back in the playoff race if you are out of it come Thanksgiving. Now, here's a look at what the Bruins will be up against when it comes to the schedule in October. And for those of you on YouTube, you can see the schedule here on your screen. The Bruins will open up the regular season in Florida on October 8th with the game against the Panthers. This will be a banner-raising game, so that can either infuse the Panthers with a lot of emotion and get them going, or perhaps the Bruins could take advantage of that emotion and just kind of exact some revenge for that second round beating at the hands of the Panthers in that one. Then the Bruins will head home for their home opener on Thursday, October 10th against the Montreal Canadiens. Canadiens should be a team that can be beat this season. Should still be one of the bottom teams in the Atlantic, but they do have a bunch of up-and-coming talent. Slafkovsky's looking to continue his breakout. Cole Caulfield, Nick Suzuki, Kirby Dach will be healthy. They've got some pretty good talent on the back end. That's not a gimme by any stretch. And just as the Bruins will be looking to disrupt the Panthers' home opener, so will the Canadiens be looking to do the same for the Bruins. Then we got a pair of afternoon games coming up. October 12th against the LA Kings. They went through some changes this offseason, dealing Pierre-Luc Dubois to Washington for Darcy Kemper. Quentin Byfield will be looking to extend his breakout as well. Just got paid quite handsomely. The Kings, maybe not as up and coming as we once thought they would be with a bunch of prospects, but still a solid squad, and playing on a Saturday afternoon, you never know what's going to happen. Following that, another matinee against the Florida Panthers. So that's 2 games against the defending Stanley Cup champions in your first 4. Not ideal. And again, an afternoon game because it's a holiday. Up here, it's Thanksgiving. So that will be a must watch for sure. But again, not a gimme by any stretch. Then they head off on the road for 3 not easy games. They'll be playing the Colorado Avalanche on the 16th of October, a team with very real Stanley Cup aspirations. Then they will head to Utah for their first game and only game next season in Salt Lake City. That will be a team that has made significant changes this offseason, not just moving from Arizona to Utah, but also adding Mikhail Sergachev. They added Brandon Montour, and they're going to be looking to impress the home crowd pretty early on. They've got a lot of good young pieces that were, added during their time in Arizona. Could be a team looking to make a statement in their first year in their new city by looking to advance to the playoffs. Then you have a game against the Nashville Predators on October 22nd. They made a big splash, of course, by adding Steven Stamkos, Jonathan Marchessault, Brady Shea. Again, a team with very real Stanley Cup aspirations. And then it doesn't stop there. They come home and play the Dallas Stars, who advanced to the Western Conference Finals once again this past season. Then they play the Toronto Maple Leafs on Saturday the 26th, the team that the Bruins, beat in the first round last season, but who, by all accounts, are going to be running it back with their core four and with new head coach in not Sheldon Keefe. Sheldon Keefe was fired, but in Craig Berube, who we know has some history against the Boston Bruins. Then to round out the month of October, they will host the Philadelphia Flyers, who are going to be an upcoming team. Matei Michkov was just landed in Philadelphia. He will certainly add some punch to their offense, and they have some pretty good young talent of their own on that roster, and were in the playoff race until late last season. And then on Halloween, October 31st, the Bruins will travel to Carolina to take on the Hurricanes. Always a tough out, of course. They've lost a few players, some defensemen, but they retained Rod Brind'Amour as head coach. They still have a bunch of pieces that make them a formidable opponent. So you look at the schedule in October as a whole, you have two non-playoff teams from last season in Montreal and Utah. As well as Philadelphia. But those are all teams that, these aren't Chicago, these aren't San Jose, this isn't Anaheim, teams that will be near the bottom of the standings. These are maybe Montreal will be once again, but Utah, Philly should be middle of the pack and pretty tough to beat. You have Florida, Colorado, Nashville, Dallas, Toronto, Carolina, all legitimate top 10 teams in the NHL and with Stanley Cup aspirations and hopes. So this will be a very, very difficult month of October for the Boston Bruins. And it's going to be very important to hit the ground running in training camp to acclimate Lindholm and Zadorov to the lineup, and especially Joonas Korpisalo, because again, you have to be aware of the slow start, and we'll ram that point home here as the podcast continues. If you're looking to go to a Major League Baseball game this summer, whether it's at Fenway Park to check out the Red Sox, maybe you're up here in Canada, want to check out the Toronto Blue Jays, you got to check out Game Time. It's an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, and they make getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch, and they have some fantastic last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and a low price guarantee. Game Time takes all the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Game Time, last-minute tickets at the lowest price, guaranteed. Now, prayers up for goalie Bob Essensa, the Boston Bruins goaltending coach, who has the task of bringing Joonas Korpisalo up to speed and helping him be an effective member of the Bruins goaltending rotation here, which, let's be honest, is not going to be rotation-based as much as it had been in the past. Last season for the Ottawa Senators, Korpisalo appeared in 55 games and had a save percentage of .890. That's not great at all. And the Senators were routinely scored on first, often on the first or second shot of the game. And the Boston Bruins playing this kind of competition in October can't afford to drop that many points. They have, 11 games on the schedule, at least 8 of which will be against pretty tough opponents. There's no back-to-backs in here, thankfully, so maybe will be able to ride Jeremy Swayman for 7, maybe 8 of these starts over the first 11 games of the season. But Korpisalo needs to show the form that he had in 2022-23 that convinced the Senators to sign him to a multi-year, multi-million-dollar contract in the first place. The Bruins are only on the hook for $3 million of that, $4 million per season, but that's over the next 4 seasons, which is a pretty significant, commitment that the Bruins took on when trading Linus Ullmark to the Ottawa Senators. And hopefully that does not backfire on them. He did have some productive games in 2022-23, playing with the Columbus Blue Jackets, who are not a great team, but he had a .913 save percentage. When he was traded to the Kings, he played in 11 games, went 7-3-1 with a .921 save percentage. The Bruins are hoping that he can reclaim that form and become a solid backup for Jeremy Swayman. And that is going to be so key for the Boston Bruins this upcoming season. A lot of their success last season, arguably the main reason they were so good, was because of the goaltending tandem of Swayman and Ullmark. You replace Ullmark with Korpisalo, and there's the risk of a significant drop-off there when Jeremy Swayman isn't in the net, and added pressure on Swayman because he knows that he has to perform better because there's no longer that, no pun intended, backup plan in Linus Ullmark. So the Bruins have to get Korpisalo up to speed and can't afford to take a losing record in October, because if you get behind the 8 ball, it's very, very difficult to catch up, especially with the loser point in the NHL. Now, we're going to take a look over the next few days at each month of the regular season and see what challenges lie ahead for them, special dates, etc. So be sure to subscribe to Locked On Boston Bruins to keep on top of all the latest with respect to the black and gold. Thank you so much for taking some time to listen today. Please do, again, subscribe if you haven't already. Please do take care of yourselves and take care of each other. And we'll be back tomorrow with a fresh episode of Locked On Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite team every single day.